There we go. Okay. Let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask your blessing upon us this day as we study your word. We ask, Lord, that you would open our hearts and minds to your will. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. I have us at 2 Peter 2, 2 and 3. The work of falsehood.
Yes.
That's where I am.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Robert, why don't you start?
All right. Many will follow the way of their blatant immoralities, and through them the true way will be brought into disrepute. In their evil ambition, they will exploit you with cunningly forged arguments. This sentence was settled long ago. Now it is not inactive, and the destruction is not asleep. In this short passage, we see four things about the false teachers and their teaching. We see the cause of false teaching. The
Robert?
cause is, yes?
Robert, stop for a second. When you read, can you give a little bit more distance between you and your mic? It's rattling in the phone.
All right. See the cause of false teaching. The cause is evil ambition. The word is pleonexia. Pleon means more, and exia comes from the verb shine, shine, which means to have. Pleonexia is a desire to possess more. This word, pleonexia, acquired a certain flavor. It is by no means always a sin to desire to possess more. There are many cases in which that is a perfectly honorable desire, as in the case of virtue or knowledge or skill. Pleonexia comes to mean the desire to possess that which a man has no right to desire, still less to take. So it can mean covetous desire for money and for other people's goods, lustful desire for the person of someone, holy ambition for honor and prestige, power. False teaching comes from this evil ambition to possess something which a man has no right to possess. It comes from the desire for nothing less than the place of Christ, for its desires to put its own ideas in the place of the truth of Jesus. False teacher is guilty of nothing less than usurping the place of Christ. See, the method of false teaching, its method is use of cunningly forged arguments. Falsehood is easily resisted when it is presented as falsehood. It is cunningly dressed in disguise as truth. It becomes threatening and menacing. There's only one touchstone. Any teacher's teaching must be tested by the words and presence of Jesus Christ himself. That is done, its falsity will be fully exposed. You see the effect of falsehood. The effect was twofold. It encouraged men to take the way of blatant immorality. The word is alphagia. We have already seen that word describes the attitude of the man who is lost to shame. He's past the stage of wishing to conceal his sin, being ashamed of it. He takes what he wants and he takes it and where he wants it. He asks for the judgment of neither man nor God, and he has no value in his own good name. We must remember that this was at the back of the teaching of these false teachers. They were perverting the grace of God into justification for sin. They were telling them that grace was inexhaustible and that therefore they were free to sin as they liked, for grace would forgive. They were presenting God's grace in a way which made grace a reason for sin. This false teaching had obviously a second effect. It brought Christianity into disrepute. Christianity produced people who acted like that. Then obviously people were going to have no use for Christians and for the Christian church. Early days, and just as much now, every Christian, good or bad, advertising of Christianity, for the Christian church. Paul's accusations of Jews that through the name of God had been brought into disrepute. Pastoral epistles of the younger women were urged today with such modesty and chastity that the church never be brought into disrepute. Any type of teaching produces the kind of person who repels them from Christianity instead of attracting them to it is false teaching. Work of those who are enemies of Christ. See the ultimate end of false teaching, and that ultimate end is destruction. The sentence was passed on the false prophets long ago. The Old Testament pronounced their doom. They look as if that sentence had become inoperative or was slumbering. It was still valid, and the day would come when the false teachers would pay the terrible price of their falsehood. No man who leads another man astray will ever escape his own judgment.
Okay. Any comments?
Is that a
Well,
problem?
could I? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say how much of a problem is it today? Christians saying, "I'll sin as much as I want, and it will be forgiven," without even trying to control their temptations.
Well, first, that thoughts only shows ignorance. I'm talking about the person saying that or thinking that they will be forgiven after they purposely go out and sin. What they will do is harden their heart. And they will come to accept and join the sin of others because of that. You can't plan knowing that you're going to sin and then go and do it. That's you're truly my disciple if you keep my commandments. You're not my disciples if you don't. That's I did have at one time a situation where I had a man come and talk to me. His wife had worked it out that he'd come and talk to me. And they were from the other side of the thumb when I was up in Michigan. And he had a relationship where he had a wife, a farm, and very successful, and an elder in his church, and a mistress on the side. And his wife knew about it and was really upset with him and was moving forward for divorce because of it. And so he came and talked to me about it. And that's basically what he said. He said, well, Lord will forgive me. And I said, you can't purposely do that. I said, if you purposely sin, I said, you're not asking for forgiveness, you're asking for permission. And that's not going to happen. And that's basically where we're looking at today. But if we look at this and we see it says something very clearly about how we live our lives and how we're to live righteous lives, that righteousness really counts. Not only for yourself, but for the people around you. Okay, buddy, you had something.
I like that distinction between permission and forgiveness. When I was listening to Robert read the passage, I was thinking about the false teacher as being, someone who elevates themselves and is not, following the example that Christ left of humility, which I've always found to be characteristic of spiritual people of whatever persuasion. But recently, I was reading my news feed, and there was an article about a new style of leadership and management in business. It was called the servant model, in which the leader acts as a servant to attend to the needs of the people in the organization. And I scanned and scanned and scanned this article and Googled it to see if there was any Christian cross-reference, because that's exactly what Jesus says, is that, he who would be Lord must be the servant, right? He who would be master must be the servant. I couldn't find any kind of tie-in, but or direct tie-in. I mean, nobody involved in this, model. There's no reference to anybody being a Christian or anything like that. But I thought it was interesting that had emerged as a management and leadership model, what Christ taught about being the servant also so long ago.
Well, that's an interesting business presentation at this point. Be interesting to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I've read about that management style being posed, being as a counter to the profit first style. I don't know how effective it would be.
I didn't know it was even out there, but I thought it was interesting that it paralleled what Christ had said about,
Yeah.
He who would be master must be the servant of all.
Okay, let's go on then. The fate of wicked and the rescue of the righteous. Buddy, why don't you go ahead and take that?
The fate of the wicked and the rescue of the righteous. 2 Peter 2:4. If God did not spare even angels who had sinned, but condemned them to the lowest hell and committed them to the pits of darkness, where they remain kept for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved in safety Noah, the preacher of righteousness with 7 others, when he dispatched the flood on a world of impious men, if he reduced the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes when he sentenced them to destruction, and so gave an example of what would happen to those who would one day act with impiety, but rescued righteous Lot, who was distressed by the blatantly immoral conduct of lawless men. For to such a man, righteous in his looking and in his hearing, it was torture for his righteous soul to live his daily life amidst such people and amidst such lawless deeds. If all this is so, you can be sure that the Lord knows how to rescue truly religious men from trial and how to preserve the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment comes, especially those whose lives are dominated by the polluting lusts of the flesh and who despise the celestial powers. Audacious, self-willed men they are. They do not shrink from speaking evil of the angelic glories, whereas angels who are greater in strength and power do not bring an accusation of evil against them in the presence of the Lord. That first piece has got to be the longest sentence in the New Testament. Here's a passage which for us combines undoubted power and equally undoubted obscurity. The white heat of the rhetorical intensity glows through it to this day, but it moves in illusions which would be terrifyingly effective to those who heard it for the first time, but which have become unfamiliar to us today. It cites 3 notorious examples of sin and its destruction, and in 2 of the cases it shows how, when sin was obliterated, righteousness was rescued and preserved by the mercy and the grace of God. Let's look at these examples one by one. the sin of the angels. Before we retell the story which lies behind this in Jewish legend, there are two separate words at which we must look. Peter says that God condemned the sinning angels to the lowest depths of hell. Literally, the Greek says that God condemned the angels to Tartarus, Tartarum. Tartarus was not a Hebrew conception, but Greek. In Greek mythology, Tartarus was the lowest hell. It was far beneath Hades, as the heaven is. It was as far beneath Hades as the heaven is high above the earth. In particular, it was a place in which there had been cast the Titans, who had rebelled against Zeus, the father of gods and men. The second word is that which speaks of the pits of darkness. Here there is a doubt. There are two Greek words, both rather uncommon, which are confused in this passage. One is seros, or seros, which originally meant a great earthenware jar for the storing of grain. Then it came to mean the great underground pits in which grain was stored and which served as granaries. Seros has come to English by a Provençal in the form of silo, which still describes the towers in which grain is stored. Still later, the word went on to mean a pit in which a wolf or other wild animal is trapped. If we think that this is the word which Peter uses, and according to the best manuscripts it is, it will mean that the wicked angels were cast into great subterranean pits and kept there in darkness and in punishment. This well suits the idea of Tartarus beneath the lowest steps of Hades. But there's a very similar word, seira, which means a chain. This is the word which the Authorized Version translates when it speaks of chains of darkness. The Greek manuscripts of 2 Peter vary between seroi, pits, and sirei, chains. But the better manuscripts have seroi, and pits of darkness makes better sense than chains of darkness. So we may take seros as right and assume that here the Authorized Version is in error. The story of the fall of the angels is one which roots itself deeply in Hebrew thought, and which underwent much development as the years went on. The original story is in Genesis 6. There the angels are called the sons of God, as they commonly are in the Old Testament. In Job, the sons of God come to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan comes amongst them. The psalmist speaks of the sons of God. These angels come to earth and seduce mortal women. The result of this lustful union was a race of giants, and through them wickedness came upon the earth. Clearly, this is an old story belonging to the childhood of the race. This story was much developed in the book of Enoch. It is from that Peter is drawing his allusions. For in his day, that was a book which everyone would know. In Enoch, the angels are called the Watchers. Their leader in rebellion was Semjahor or Azazel. In his instigation, they describe the sinner to Mount Hermon in the days of Jared, the father of Enoch. They took mortal wives and instructed them in magic and in arts which gave them power. They produced the race of the giants, and the giants produced the Nephilim, the giants who inhabited the land of Canaan, and of whom the people were afraid. These giants became cannibals and were guilty of every kind of lust and crime, and especially of insolent arrogance to God and man. The apocryphal literature has many references to them in their pride. Wisdom tells how the proud giants perished. Ecclesiasticus tells how the ancient giants fell away in the strength of their foolishness. They had no wisdom, and they perished in their folly. Baruch. Josephus says that they were arrogant and contemptuous of all that was good and trusted in their own strength. Job says that God charged his angels with folly. This whole story makes a strange and fleeting appearance in the letters of Paul. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says that women must have their hair covered in the church because of the angels. Behind that strange saying lies the old belief that it was the loveliness of the long hair of the women of the olden times which moved the angels to desire, and Paul wishes to see that the angels are not tempted again. In the end, even men complained of the sorrow and misery brought into the world by these giants through the sin of the angels. The result was that God sent out his archangels. Raphael bound Azazel hand and foot and shut him up in darkness. Gabriel slew the giants and the watchers. The sinning angels were shut up in the abysses of darkness under the mountains for 70 generations, and then confined forever in everlasting fire. Here is a story which is in Peter's mind, and which his readers well knew. The angels had sinned, and God had sent his destruction, and they were shut up forever in the pits of darkness and the depths of hell. This is what happens to rebellious sin. The story does not stop there. It reappears in another of its forms in the passage of 2 Peter. In verse 10, Peter speaks of those who live lives dominated by the polluting lusts of the flesh and who despise its celestial powers. The word is kuriotes, which is the name of one of the ranks of angels. They speak evil of the angelic glories. The word is daxai. Let me see that. What would that be?
Bilkai?
Yeah, which is also a word for one of the ranks of angels. They slander the angels and bring them into disrepute. Here is where the second turn of the story comes in. Obviously, this story of the angels is very primitive, and as time went on, it became rather an awkward and embarrassing story because of its description of lust to angels. So in later Jewish and Christian thought, two lines of thought developed. First, it was denied that the story involved angels at all. The sons of God were said to be good men who were the descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men were said to be evil women who were the daughters of Cain and corrupted the good men. There is no scriptural evidence for this distinction and this way of escape. Second, the whole story was allegorized. It was claimed, for instance, by Philo that it was never meant to be taken literally and described the fall of the human soul under the attack of the seductions of lustful pleasures. Augustine declared that no man could take this story literally and talk of the angels like that. Cyril of Alexandria said that it could not be taken literally, for it did not, Jesus said that in the afterlife men would be like angels and there would be no marrying or giving in marriage. Chrysostom said that if the story was taken literally, it was nothing short of blasphemy. And Cyril went on to say that the story was nothing other than an incentive to sin if it was taken as literally true. It's clear that men begin to see that this was indeed a dangerous story. Here we get out our clue as to what Peter means when he speaks of men who despise the celestial powers and bring the angelic glories into disrepute by speaking slanderously of them. The men whom Peter was opposing were turning their religion into an excuse for blatant immorality. Cyril of Alexandria makes it clear that in his day, the story could be used as an incentive to sin. Most probably what was happening was that the wicked men of Peter's time were citing the example of the angels as a justification for their own sin. They were saying, if angels came from heaven and took mortal women, why should not we? They were making the conduct of the angels an excuse for their own sin. We have to go still further with this passage. In verse 11, it finishes very obscurely. It says that angels who are greater in strength and in power do not bring a slanderous charge against them in the presence of God. Once again, Peter is speaking elusively, in a way that would be clear enough to the people of his day, but which is obscure to us. His reference may be either of two stories. He may be referring to the story in which Jude refers in Jude 9 that the archangel Michael was entrusted with the bearing of the body of Moses. Satan claimed the body on the grounds that all matter belonged to him, and that once Moses had murdered an Egyptian, it belonged to him, and that once Moses had murdered an Egyptian. Michael did not bring a railing charge against Satan. All he said was, "The Lord rebuke you." The point is that even an angel so great as Michael would not bring an equal charge against an angel as dark as Satan. He left the matter to God. If Michael refrained from slandering an evil angel, how can men bring slanderous charges against the angels of God? He may be referring to a further development of the Enoch story. Enoch tells that when the conduct of the giants on earth became intolerable, men made their complaint to the archangels Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and Raphael. The archangels took this complaint to God, and they did not rail against the evil angels who were responsible for it all. They simply took the story to God for him to deal with Enoch, to deal with. As far as we can see today, a situation behind Peter's allusions is that the wicked men who were the slaves of lust claimed that the angels were their example in their justification and so slandered them. Peter reminds them that not even archangels dare slander other angels and demands how men can dare so. This is a strange and difficult passage, but the meaning is clear. Even angels, when they sinned, were punished. How much more shall men be punished? Angels could not rebel against God and escape the consequences. How shall men escape? And men need not put the blame on others, not even on angels. Nothing but their own rebelliousness is responsible for their sin. I think I mentioned in the past how I have a copy of the Book of Enoch, and I was always particularly interested in the role of the Watchers. Like, who were the Watchers? And Enoch tells us a lot about the Watchers. And I mentioned to Dave, and Dave and I have talked about how in that movie Noah, the directors makes use of the Watchers. They turn into these kind of cyber monsters or whatever. But before I shut up here, I was in a bookstore, browsing a bookstore last week. I noticed in the religion section, there's a brand new reprint, annotated, expanded on, of the Book of Enoch, available in paperback. So I thought it was interesting that Enoch's making a comeback.
Yeah, well, the Apocrypha makes a comeback, right?
Yeah. Well, it was in a section. It was religion, and then occult literature. We kind of followed there. It was over in the religion section, which kind of borders on the occult section there. So it's right in that niche, and I thought that it was interesting because when I got my copy of the Book of Enoch, I found it at a used bookstore. I was surprised to find it, but now it's making a big comeback apparently.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, and I'd have to say, what's Barclay? What's the point that he's trying to make?
Well, I'm curious why he goes on so extensively about this allusion of Peter's.
It's just there's a
All
lot
tied up in the last paragraph.
Well, and this whole idea that an angel cannot make a disparaging comment about another angel, I've never heard that before.
Well,
I think he's saying that a good angel would not condemn Satan, but would kind of leave it up to God. So
I've heard,
but angels who are close to God know enough to know that they're not in the role of judging anybody. That's not their function. That's up to God.
well, anyway, I'd like to know what Barclay's up to.
Well, I think Barclay is showing his vast reading in the
He's showing
areas. I think he's showing that he's done a lot of Apocrypha and readings of that type, and trying to take that mindset, saying this was the knowledge of the time for the Jews, so that they would understand what this discussion was about. And basically, if you read the text and just stick with the text and not try to, come up with other ways of understanding it, that it's saying don't be arrogant and show a little respect for those things you know nothing about.
Well, he doesn't know nothing about it either.
Well, and that would be the other point of it. Why waste your time
Exactly.
in angiology or whatever they call it? That's a distraction from Christianity.
Interesting when they talked about the Titans. Now that got my attention right away, and then he kind of shifted.
Yeah,
gear.
well, he's over in Greek mythology.
Yeah, but the Titans had a number that there was 12 Titans, and that number caught, because we talk about the number 12 in the Bible all the time.
Yeah, well,
And was he trying to make that comparison, or is he just out?
no, you didn't hear him say 12, so let's not read into that.
But there's 12 in the Greek mythology. There were 12 Titans.
Yeah.
So he didn't say it for whatever reason. Maybe he just left it out. But I just thought that was interesting.
Well, see, where this comes in, with our modern knowledge of so much extraneous stuff like that, that there's a tendency to look at the scriptures as mythology also, and so that's distracting from God's word at the same time.
Well, he's making the reference. I don't really make that connection, not really, but for some reason he does. Yeah.
Well, I think what Pastor was saying, is sort of parallels what I was taught, which is that a lot of the Apocrypha are harmless enough as long as one doesn't derive any doctrine or anything from it. But one thing my teacher taught me that was valuable was, if you are going to read them, it does give you some insight into the early Christian mindset of the people who make up the New Testament. This is the kind of stuff that they were reading, and that they might have known about.
It reminds me of like an Avenger movie or something. That whole thing. Yeah, just a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, well, it makes up for good TV today, huh?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And to understand us in the 21st century, some people in the future might have, need to know like what the Avenger movie was, Dave. What was that?
My kids are really experts on that, so I'd have to ask them, because I watch the movies and I have no idea what's going on.
I have a question, and it may be off the field, so when it talked about the fall of the angels, for me, that's a big deal in Mormon theology. That has to do with the fall, not necessarily, angels and mortals, marrying and whatnot. But where in the Bible, or is there a place in the Bible that it talks about the fall of Satan and his angels? Because, I'm so indoctrinated with the story from the Mormonism that I really would like to know if there's a biblical reference to that.
A biblical reference to the angels' fall?
To the fall of Satan, yeah, and what happened. I mean, they talk about the war in heaven and, all of this.
There's very little statements concerning that. As I understand it, and I'm just, I'm going back into the gray matter now. So I'm talking about mine. That Satan was an angel that was a worship leader. And in the worship leading, he decided that he wanted the worship rather than be giving it to God. And then he worked out as one of the great angels uh, and he was able to seduce a third of the angels to support him. And that did the war in heaven because of it. Now, that's an overview of everything that I've learned as far as that's concerned. And I really, I got to the point and said, that doesn't lead anywhere. This overindulgence in Satan and who he is and what he does, and it moves right into Satanism and all that whole thing there. I don't want any part of that in my mind. So I don't go there. I've had to go into areas, and I've run into people who were stuck in that, where they sacrificed deer. We found there's signs and stuff like that they put out there, but that gets so deranged that you don't want to get into that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. I just wondered, where exactly in the Bible does it talk about it? Because
in the Psalms, there's a couple of statements concerning in the Psalms, and there's a couple of statements here in Jude and 2 Peter.
Well, I've had Mormons point out to me the fallen heaven as being evident in passages in Revelation, which we studied in the recent past.
Yeah, you do have some statements in Revelation concerning that also.
And then Barclay points out Job. But I think if you look at these, those are kind of open to interpretation. You could make a lot of stuff out of that, right? You don't really get the layout of the story as it's brought down in tradition. But, as Pastor says, so what? That's not particularly, a lot of that's not particularly fruitful. But so are these deer sacrifices, Pastor? Are they in the Upper Peninsula?
No, it wasn't in the Upper Peninsula. It was in the Thumb. And
okay.
I had one of my members come across it, and he called me concerning it, and we went out and checked it out at that point. And then I had somebody who thought she was able to put curses on people, and she was into into Satanism, and she was into the mafia, and it was anyhow, it was a mess, and it doesn't lead anywhere but into more of a mess.
Yeah, I was just curious if the Satanists happened to be hiding out up there, or whether that was a hotbed of Satanism up there.
Yeah.
Well, over in I forget what the name of the town was. Maybe Carsonville, something like that. They had a satanic store and cult established over there. Some
spooky.
Well, because you get to things like the McVeigh thing over in Decker, and he's the one that was down there and did that. And you believe people left to themselves and to their fears and the like, they can really get distorted, and then they become dangerous.
Who, McVeigh? Who are you talking about?
Timothy.
Timothy McVeigh.
He's the one that down in, was it Oklahoma City, the bombing?
Yeah, I know, but
That's where he came from, Decker. And they had the militia up in that area at the same time, and that's it brought a spotlight on to this weirdness that was going on up there
in Michigan.
Yeah, it was in the
Okay.
Thumb.
Some of that weirdness has just reared its ugly head here recently in Michigan. Okay, I got you there. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, it's a nice story. I'll leave it at that. And it's people get a kick out of the, for whatever reason, for reading it. And
Well, I think it's that classical reading and the like. If you read something like the classics themselves, the Homer, Iliad, Odyssey, and them, they were used as writings to encourage people, to strengthen heroism, and they by reading them and understanding them more as mythology, but also as a metaphor for actual living. That's how they became so important in classical Greek literature. They were kind of like the Greek pagan Bible. That's where they learned morality and heroism and tragedy and all about life. All right, let's go on then. The men of the flood and the rescue of Noah is where we're at. And Dennis, you want to take that?
The second illustration of the destruction of wickedness which Peter chooses may be said to lead on from the first. The sin introduced into the world by the sinning angels led to the intolerable sin which ended in the destruction by the deluge. In the midst of the destruction, God did not forget those who had clung to him. Noah was saved together with 7 others, his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Josphat, and their wives. In Jewish tradition, Noah acquired a very special place. Not only was he regarded as the one man who had been saved, but also the preacher who had done his best to turn men from evil of their ways. Josephus said, many angels of God lay with women and begot sons who were violent and who despised all good on account of their reliance on their own strength. But Noah, displeased and distressed at their behavior, tried to induce them to alter their dispositions and conduct for the better. Attention in this passage is concentrated not so much on the people who were destroyed as on the man who was saved. Noah is offered as the type of man who, amidst the destruction of the wicked, receives the salvation of God. His outstanding qualities are 2. 1, in the midst of sinning generation, he remained faithful to God. Later, Paul was to urge his people to be not conformed to the world, but transformed from it. It may well be said that often the most dangerous sin of all is conformity. To be the same as others is always easy. To be different is always difficult. But from the days of Noah until now, he who would be the servant of God must be prepared to be different from the world. 2, the later legends pick out another characteristic of Noah. He was the preacher of righteousness. The word for the preacher used here is curex, which literally means a herald. Epictetus called the philosopher the curex of the gods. The preacher is the man who brings to men an announcement from God. Here is something of very considerable significance. The good man is concerned not only with the saving of his own soul, but just as much with the saving of the souls of others. He does not, in order to preserve his own purity, live apart from men. He is concerned to bring God's message to them. A man ought never to keep to himself the grace which he has received. It is always his duty to bring light to those who sit in darkness, guidance to the wanderer, and warning to those who are going astray.
Okay. That's what Buddy and I were talking about in that movie, Noah. that was kind of it wasn't a bad movie. It was,
No, it wasn't.
it got my attention. Yeah. But just a couple comments here on the many angels of God lay with women. Now that's kind of a supercharged statement there.
That's again taking from one verse and turning it into something that it wasn't. And they're talking about the people, the Hebrew of the time, making this into their story, their understanding of it. Again, that's it's something to be careful with.
Well, just in the Bible, the story of Noah is in Genesis, and I don't recall everything, but it's not very long. It's just a really short. What is it? A couple of pages, if that. It's not very long at all.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. And I like the story a lot. I really do. And you know that they go around looking for Noah's Ark, and they found it. Did they find it somewhere?
Well, supposedly, but then not quite, and it's become. I think it's under a bunch of rocks, personally.
In Turkey. In Turkey.
Yeah,
Or they might have found 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah. That's and in the during the Second World War, it was visible on the mountain. There's several people that when they flew by, they saw it per se, and I don't know. They probably have all that information at that monument, the actual building to the dimensions, the Ark. Up there in the east, I forget where that's at.
They go by cubits. Is that what they're measuring by?
Yeah, cubic is about 18 inches.
Yeah.
Okay, if you lay that out on the ground, that's a really big. I mean, it's like an aircraft carrier.
The Ark itself. Yeah. Oh yeah, I would agree.
But anyhow, they built one, for a museum, and they advertise it every so often on the TV with the giraffe falling down or something like. Anyhow, they're advertising where they have put this over in, I don't know, it's Kentucky, Tennessee, somewhere in there. They built it. They built an attraction for people to come and look and see and see what it was all about. And then this isn't a false. This is possible. Well, we know from reading it in Scripture that it's real. So,
So other cultures at that time also have a story about a very destructive natural event. So something happened at that time.
well, go through your west here and look around, and it looks just like the bottom of an ocean. Okay, with your plateaus and all this other stuff. To think that there was not a flood or it wasn't covered with water is ridiculous.
Well, yeah, that's proven.
Yeah, you can see the water line on the mountains.
Well, I tell you, as the water went down, many of those mountains came up as it pushed it down, and we probably have more and higher peaks. And if you go over into Europe, you see that with all their major peaks also.
Robert, you kind of hit on something there with the old Lake Bonneville.
Yeah.
When it drained, there was a cataclysmic event, and the lake lost its shoreline, and all the water drained out of the the Snake River drainage system into the ocean. And to this day, we still see the old lake lines from Lake Bonneville on the side of the mountain. You see them everywhere.
It's quite a sight.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah. And that happened roughly, if you were going to say, when did that happen? Well, if it was, let's say, just for sake of pick a number, 10,000 years ago. Well, that's about the time maybe when Noah was actually alive, and the flood they had in the Middle East after the last ice age, where it spilled out into the desert, and flooded that whole area. Yep.
Okay, well, let's go on then. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And how about Susan for that one?
The third example is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the rescue of Lot. The terrible and dramatic story is told in Genesis 18 and 19. It begins with Abraham's plea that God should not destroy the righteous with the guilty, and his request that if even 10 who are righteous are found in these cities, they may be spared. Then follows one of the grimmest tales in the Old Testament. The angelic visitors came to Lot, and he persuaded them to stay with him, but his house was surrounded by men of Sodom, demanding that these strangers might be brought out for them to use for their unnatural lust. By the terrible deed, at one and the same time, the abuse of hospitality, the insulting of angels, and the raging of unnatural lust, the doom of the city was sealed. As the destruction of heaven came upon them, Lot and his family were saved, except his wife, who lingered and looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had settled. Here again is the story of the destruction of sin and the rescue of righteousness. As in Noah, we see in Lot the characteristics of the righteous person. 1. Lot lived in the midst of evil, and the very sight of it was a constant distress to him. Moffat reminds us of the saying of the 19th century churchman John Henry Newman, "Our greatest security against sin lies in being shocked at it." Here is something very significant. It often happens that when evil first emerges, people are shocked by them. But as time goes on, they cease to be shocked and accept them as a matter of course. There are many things which ought to shock us. In our own generation, there are problems of prostitution and promiscuity, drunkenness and drugs, gambling and the breakdown of marriages, violence, vandalism, and crime, death upon the roads, still existing slum conditions, and many others. In many cases, the tragedy is that these things have ceased to shock and are accepted in a matter-of-fact style as part of the normal order of things. For the good of the world and of our own souls, we must keep alive the sensitivity that is shocked by sin. 2. Lot lived in the midst of evil, and yet he escaped its contamination. Surrounded by the sin of Sodom, he remained true to God. If we only remember it, in the grace of God, we have an antiseptic which will preserve us from the infection of sin. There is no need to be slaves of the environment in which we happen to find ourselves. 3. When the worst came to the worst, Lot was willing to take a clean break with his environment. He was prepared, however much he did not want to do so, to leave it forever. It was because his wife was not prepared to make the clean break that she perished. There is a strange verse in the Old Testament story. It says that when Lot lingered, the angelic messengers took hold of his hands. There are times when the influence of heaven tries to force us out of evil situations. It may come to any one of us to have to make the choice between security and a new start. And there are times when people can save their souls only by breaking clean away from their present situation and beginning all over. It was in doing just that that Lot found his salvation. And it was in failing to do that that his wife lost hers.
Okay. I think that Lot's wife, that was pretty harsh what happened to her. And how come it's always a woman that has this stuff happen? Yeah. What? She didn't do something that terribly wrong. She just turned around and looked.
Well, what did she do though?
She was told not to.
She was told not to, and she did.
Typically, yeah.
It's just like we were Adam and Eve. She was told not to, and she did. We have to listen to God's word, and when we hear God's word, we have to live by it. There's a reason why He has said that, why He gives us those commands, and they're for our good, not for our harm. We harm ourselves when we break His word, when we stop following His commands. So, I hear all this wonderfulness about Lot in the way he's being described here and the like, but I also remember that what happened in the end for Lot and his daughters. We're a sum total of our experiences, who we are. And the only thing that saves us is not our works, but what Christ did for us. And He did it for us to teach us, and He asks us, commands us to trust Him, trust His word, trust God's word. That's the only thing that saves us. It's a hard lesson to learn. Mankind's been struggling with it for an awful long time. Any more comments?
Well, I just, what he says about sin and our being shocked by it. I mean, that's so apropos for today's society. I mean, I'm old, I know that, and I lived through the 60s. And, what happened through the whole 60, 70 revolution for us as young people at that point was one thing. And it just seems like, everything expands off of that. And so now things that are clearly prohibited or talked against in the scriptures are now everyday common stuff. And we're not shocked anymore. It's just, we just take it for granted. And then, I don't know how much more we can take for granted. It's becoming just really crazy.
Well, we could certainly say that things have not changed. Mankind has gone back to the time of Noah. No question about it.
Well, they didn't have in the 60s, they didn't have the internet. And that was probably a good thing. We would have really done a lot of damage if we had the internet way back then.
That's true.
Well, I think part of it is, the media has expanded, so we know more and more about that. But if you kind of look at behavior and sinfulness, 100 years ago, there were brothels in downtown Salt Lake City, right? Straight-laced town. And that was normal, right? But you didn't have the media kind of broadcasting that everywhere, But the behavior was still there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you were also in a society that where polygamy was at least winked at.
It was commanded. It
Well,
was-
if in fact not insisted upon.
Yeah. Okay. So
They called polygamy the peculiar institution. That's what that was referred to way back then. Yeah.
well, they had that back at Abraham's time too, right?
Uh,
Well, I guess I'm not talking about new sin, because it's all old sin. I mean, there's nothing new under the heaven,
No.
as Ecclesiastic says. But
It
I'm
just
talking,
society condemned it before. Now
yes,
now
and now it's normalized. I mean, now we have
Yeah.
in marriages of, same-sex people, and no matter what I think personally emotionally about that, it once that kind of behavior was not condoned. I mean, it happened, it was prevalent, but now it's been normalized in society.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's a constitutional right, according to some people.
Yeah, but let's not get on the high horse on this thing. We still have to reach out to people who are gender confused, who are mated up in an improper manner, sinfully. We still have to love them and try to bring them into an understanding of Christ's forgiveness and that what they're doing is not acceptable to God.
No, I didn't mean that as a condemnation. In fact,
I know, but it's always heard that way by those
yeah,
that
that's
hear
true.
it from the
But
other side, and that's
I have people in my life who live that lifestyle whom I care a great deal about.
yeah.
But that behavior is
Yeah, well,
know.
it's the same thing that you said about, Dave said about Lot's wife. I mean, that's pretty harsh, but it's pretty clear. Okay, and so we have to love them and continue to try to call them back into some type of either a celibate lifestyle or finding a mate that is acceptable in God's sight. It's not an easy thing. The problem is today in society, if you say something is wrong or unacceptable in God's sight, that's the big sin, is to make the correction. And quite frankly, for those people like yourself, Susan, are talking about that, that has to be terribly hard on them because they love the people that they're in relationship with, but at the same time, there's certain parts of that relationship that's totally unacceptable and will not be accepted, and it leads to a truly dead end. So, and you see that even with children who are struggling with, and young people who are struggling with their gender identity. If they don't find their identity as male and female, biologically and mentally, their life is going to be a mess all the way through. And the solution the society has come to just accepting it as it is and trying to help it along. If I want to be a girl, I can be a girl. That's not going to help that person. That's the same thing that's happened as far as the psychology was concerned when they said it was normal instead of abnormal concerning it. It was because they couldn't come up with a correction and frustration. And so obviously it's acceptable. Well, no, it's not. And we've had this problem through society all the way back. So, and we should be shocked by it. But we have to deal with it. We have to love those people out of that. Let's close with prayer for today. Thank you all for being with us. Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you for Jesus Christ, your dear Son, for forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. Lord, you accept us as we are. You love us and care for us. You command us to be perfect. Because we cannot be perfect, you went to the cross and the grave for us and rose again so that you have the power to forgive our sins. We pray, Lord, that we'll never forget you, that we'll always trust you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.